All right, everyone, the paper dragon has been ignited. China is doing so poorly right now, they're not even going to set a growth goal for 2020. You know why? Because their economy for 2020 is likely to have shrunk considerably. I think that if we can get fair economic data from China, we're going to find out that the hit is far worse for them than it is for virtually anyone else, because you've got a double whammy hitting China. The first problem is that, well, technically a triple whammy. The first is domestically. Of course, China's got a growing consumer class, growing middle class of several hundred million people now that absorbs a lot of Chinese products, also imports a lot of foreign products at high expense, by the way, vexing China. And these people, of course, because of coronavirus, by and large, have throttled back their movement in country, travel abroad, their businesses and so forth. A lot of factories being shuttered, crops gone unsown, so to speak. That hits their economy right on the face. The second wave is that the United States, because of recession conditions and other major importers of Chinese goods, aren't buying right now. If U.S. factories are closed, it's just like with oil. If U.S. factories are closed, then they don't need those Chinese components they normally import. That affects their manufacturing and export industry, which is basically the economy of China. That's number two. Number three, you now have a growing anti-Chinese sentiment, at least in the economic sense, within a lot of countries. Because the Chinese government is responsible for the coronavirus pandemic. Poor lab protocol, instituted centrally by the government of China, because they're a communist country, number one. And number two, the reluctance of the Chinese to share data for the first few weeks, and their inadmission of human-to-human transmission, number one, and number two, the transmissibility and nature of this disease, and even the fact that it existed for the first couple of weeks, caused this pandemic. China is responsible. This is now being openly admitted to and investigated actively by numerous governments. This is not Trump hates China, Orange Man is trying to blame China for the Trump virus or something. No, Canada's Trudeau is no friend of Trump and is definitely very, very pro-China. He is himself talking about that fact. The South Koreans, the Japanese, fucking basically everyone in the world, Russian government, everyone is saying, maybe China's responsible for this. Maybe we should sue for reparations. Maybe the nation uniquely responsible for this being a pandemic in the first place should aid everybody else. After all, they're the second largest economy. They're always talking about how wonderful and wealthy they are. They've siphoned away half the world's gold. Why don't we just reabsorb our wealth from China? See, there's a movement to bring back U.S. and other manufacturing from China. And by the way, it's going to take literally years to recover fully in the industrial sense. As far as the commercial sense, we might recover in the next 6 months or so, at least for the most part. By the way, it's very funny. It's very funny to see the new left ethno-nationalists and like the old left, like the beret wearers, like a Kim.com. It's funny to see how they're proving horseshoe theory, at least on the topic right now, of Madrumpf and the U.S. economy and opportunistically using economic alarmism, which is based on a Chinese pandemic, no less, communist nation, to try to enforce their bizarre political goals. It's very funny to see that happen. I think that they will both fail in due time because of a partially V-shaped recovery. Anyway, China, the U.S. is forthcoming. Yeah, we're losing GDP. Yeah, there's the enormous number of jobless claims. China doesn't really give us solid numbers. They manipulate their currency all the time for this reason. The Chinese economy, I said this like, what was it, 4 or 5 years ago, is a paper dragon. It's a paper tiger. What it is it's the illusion of limitless growth based on foreign investment. What happens is you open up for foreign investment and say, you can come in and rape and pillage and we don't care as long as you're paying us our cut and you're not raising any political problems. So foreign groups come in and they invest. The Chinese government takes that productivity, that GDP, that capital, that wealth that they're generating, builds infrastructure. Then they say to other people, hey, look at how much our economy grew. You should invest here. Look, we've got new roads and rails in this area. There's nothing there yet. Why don't you put your factory here? And so another wave of companies moves in. And this has happened now for several decades. The problem is that it doesn't lead to any long-term actual stability within the economy. A lot of that infrastructure at this point is still empty. The growth just isn't happening. They need like 8 or 9% growth to keep up, and it's below now 5%. And it's going to go into the negative territory for this year, which is exactly why they're not releasing an expectation. They don't want to tell their people, by the way, we expect that our economy is going to shrink by 10% in this fucking year. They don't want to tell people that. The investors will flee. They'll flee to a country that's cheaper, number one. Number two, people in China might panic. They might start to withdraw their money from the markets, causing a death spiral, causing a collapse. It's just like this is the reason why China didn't tell anyone about coronavirus for the first few weeks. They wanted the rest of the world to get infected. The Chinese government deliberately allowed this pandemic because they realized it was already a local epidemic and couldn't be contained. They didn't want to close their borders to the rest of the world and say, oh, well, don't worry, we'll absorb the hit. And then it would legitimately just be a Chinese problem. They were afraid of the effectiveness of their own quarantine capabilities because then foreign investors would say, oh shit, China's got the plague, I'm leaving. And for months and months they'd hemorrhage 10 times as much wealth as they already are. But they're already in recession territory, but they're not going to tell that to anyone. They're not even going to release goals. They're trying to kick the can down the road because their economy is an illusion. Chinese economy is the illusion, not the American economy. The U.S. economy is just going to do just fine, all things considered, assuming we can open things back up. And here's the wild card, and here's what I worry about. There are enough states run by tyrant wannabes like Whitmer and Northam and the state of California and many others, and Cuomo, that are trying to keep things closed for malevolent purposes. I really hope that the American citizenry there stops tolerating it and says, look, we're not going to live the rest of our lives in fear. This is the United States. This is not meant to be a tyrant regime. Dude, Trump right now has to encourage governors to allow people to exercise their First Amendment right to go to a fucking church in some states. Now, last I checked, the First Amendment was ironclad, but I mean, I woke up one day and found out the right to free assembly, technically the right to a free press in the journalistic sense of going out and gathering news, the right to privacy in the sense of, you know, not having your home randomly searched for New Yorkers if you happen to be in New Jersey, and many other auspices of the Constitution suddenly disappeared overnight because there was a flu. Yeah. It's very interesting how that happened. See, this is why after this pandemic paranoia blows over, we need a constitutional convention. We need to kick as many of these tyrant wannabes out as possible, get the states and as much of Congress as possible run by sane people, and we need a constitutional amendment to end these lockdowns permanently so that the government can never again do this sort of thing. So that our economy will never be on the brink of a Great Depression again, like centrally run China, which for several months virtually shut down everything, and is a manufacturing muscle, but also heavily based on exports that they can't make. Even if China right now, by the way, and this is why China's fucked more than the United States, as a major export economy, even if China begins to produce again, a lot of that stuff can't be sold. China will have to absorb it itself. It'll have massive stockpiles of cheap consumer goods. And here's the problem. Oh, here's the bigger problem. As U.S. firms look to other, you know, maybe more decent places to build their factories, like India or Malaysia or something, a lot of that stuff will never be sold. The Chinese government will centrally have to liquidate those assets, pay off the investors what they're owed, and then own a bunch of dead weight. Chinese government is going to have problems for like the next decade because of this. They'll probably maintain an on and off recession for that time. By the way, that does impact the rest of the world. The availability of the Chinese economy to a lot of U.S. tech firms especially is very important. It's a good thing that Silicon Valley is beginning to make its workforce remote because they're going to need to. That's about all. Peace out.